But now I want to bring out Chris Sacca, founder, maybe CEO, I'm not sure, of Lower Carbon Capital. Chris. CEO, am I wrong?
I don't know. It's a pretty flat org. We don't have a lot of titles.
You don't have a lot of titles. So Chris, can I start here? So last year, you sent an investor letter. And for those who don't know, Lower Carbon Capital, as the name, is obviously focused on climate and climate tech. And the beginning of this 12-page letter said, quote, "The climate is fucked, even worse than it seems." 16 months later, even worse than it seemed then, more fucked, less fucked.
Yeah, I know. I mean, way worse. And so I think the models, even it's funny, even the people who are labeled alarmists now are calling it short. And so I think they didn't take into account methane, 82 times worse a greenhouse gas than carbon. And so we got a little bit of a reprieve thanks to the lockdowns and the slowdown in China, but it's bad. But I think what's worse is that it's exposed how climate just isn't hippie shit. It affects national security, it affects supply chains, it affects daily life. I mean, there's no line of business that will not be impacted by climate. That's also the opportunity, is there's nothing, there's literally no line of business. Nobody in here is in a business that won't have a massive opportunity as a result of what will be the biggest economic transformation in the history of the planet.
You started obviously you're a reformed lawyer, I guess you could say, and you were at Google for a while.
We can talk about that. Yeah,
fair. And you start in venture capital as a kind of traditional venture capitalist, big hits, Instagram, Twitter, Uber, et cetera. You retire, you come back to do Lower Carbon. Was there a moment or a particular thing you remember said, I have to do this, it's very different?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so lowercase was by necessity. I was still trying to, when you and I knew each other, I was paying back my student loans. A few years after that, I was still trying to get a mortgage.
Google didn't pay you enough to repay your student loans?
No, I finally made it back to zero after the Google IPO. And I had a party, but it was a BYOB party because I wasn't going to go back into debt to host all my buddies. So lowercase is by necessity. It had to work. I didn't. In fact, when I wrote my first $25,000 check to Twitter, that was material to me. So I just would show up to the offices uninvited. Jack fucking hated me, but I was like, I need this money back someday, so we're going to get to work here and actually build a business. And so I didn't have a badge to the door, but I did the first $35 million in revenue there because it just needed to happen. But Lower Carbon got to this point where, and no offense to my good buddy Mark, who's coming up in a bit, but I was sitting in this chair at Shark Tank, and somebody came in pitching a kitchen gadget. And it was cool. The entrepreneur was great. She was killing it.
Spatula
I could see the
3.0.
market. Yeah, exactly. I could see the market developing. And I just had this moment where I was like, is this why I want to, would I feel good explaining to my kids, this is why I can't hang out right now? It's because I'm working with this company. And because here's the thing. If I went on The Bachelor and got married and divorced 6 weeks later, that's par for the course. The tabloids would totally accept that. But when you do a deal with a company,
your wife might not, but continue.
Yeah, no, but if you do a deal with a company, that's like a 10 to 15 year commitment. It really is. And so, and I don't know any other way to be successful in that business than to dive in and really put that much energy in it. And it just started to feel empty for me. And my wife, Crystal, is my partner in all of this, and we just felt less fulfilled. It was also at the time that democracy was imploding. And we were really wrestling with a lot of stuff in the criminal justice system, the obesity epidemic, extreme poverty. And so we were pursuing solutions to a lot of that stuff. And it was starting to realize that in climate that we were wildly concerned about, it didn't have to be predicated on philanthropy and activism, that the unit economics of that business had changed. Because I think you can only, guilt and shame will only get you to change the behavior of 200 to 300 million people on the planet. Big number nominally, but relatively a small number. To get to the other 7.5 billion people, you have to hit them in their wallet. You just have to give them a better, faster, cheaper, cooler, sexier, more delicious, easier to use, more durable option. And I started to see that happen. The same thing that happened in Y Combinator was happening in climate tech. Massive compute clusters, synthetic biology tools that teams of 3 could get access to that would have cost $500 million just a few years earlier, to where they could build something that existed that you could play with, so it wasn't a business plan, And then they could get to that first arm's length customer in like 12 months. And that was where it all shifted. And it was funny, when we first started it, big names and climate were like, dude, don't bring the torture on yourself.
Because the first kind of big VC wave in the climate tech, they all got wiped out.
Yeah, I mean, Dor will tell you, Dor's a mentor.
John Doerr,
Dor will tell you that his billion became 3 billion. And so just not in a hurry. And thankfully, he and Koso and those guys really did pioneer that stuff. But it was just too damn expensive. And so the cost to start those companies was too high. So the unit economics didn't make sense. And they depended upon regulation and subsidy. So when they started getting into climate, they also hired Al Gore and Colin Powell to go lobby. Well, I have an allergy to that political process. I mean, you can see I don't really dress the part, and I have trouble being diplomatic in those situations. And so instead, I wanted to build a business that didn't depend upon government for anything, where our relationship was directly between us and a consumer, us and a business, or us and government as a buyer. And not have to ask permission or beg, and instead just offer you something that you will choose because it's better.
I'm curious. There are some who agree with you about your statement that the climate is fucked, it's worse than you believe, and then they have an addendum, though, which is, and all the climate tech's being worked on, wonderful. We've already passed that Rubicon. It's nice, and it is good, and there might be money in it, but from a climate perspective, we're too late.
I mean, fuck them. I just don't have patience for that. What I would say is it's a J-curve. It will get worse, but it will absolutely get better. And my job is to try and flatten out the trough of that J-curve. And I'm really excited because I think the capability, I love when people hate on this because it's like those people who say we'll never need more than 7 computers in the world kind of thing, right? It's just like anyone betting against the pace of technological progress, I love being on the other side of that fucking bet. And so like what we're able to produce with costs coming down precipitously, with efficiency and productivity coming up, and what's happening on decarbonization, because it's just better. Like digging up and burning old dinosaur bones is fucking expensive. And so anytime we can take that out of a process, you make more money. We have a company that makes industrial scale chemicals using enzymes instead of oil. They do a 9-figure run rate right now.
What's the name of the company?
Solugen. 9-figure run rate, not sure if I'm supposed to say that, but 9-figure run rate, 60% margins, selling a commodity. And the people they sell it to are oil and gas companies who don't give a fuck about the climate. They ask 2 questions. Is it hydrogen peroxide? And is it cheaper? Well, then fuck it, I'll buy it. That's my dream customer right there.
One of the other things you said, and I don't know if it was in the letter you said to me, was that at the time you didn't feel, this is last year, that you were facing too much deal competition, certainly less than you faced when you were doing kind of traditional consumer tech or enterprise tech deals. Is that still true, or has the competition significantly increased for these deals over the last 16 months? So
this is the only time in my business where I have actively recruited other people to it. And by the way, after being locked in your house for a year and a half, there's a lot of VCs who are calling up and saying, hey, I want to move from success to impact. I want to get into climate stuff. It's not easy. We have a big science and technical bench. A lot of what we work on is hard. And so one area that's crowded is the SaaS stuff. There's going to be a ton of demand for SaaS. We've de-emphasized it in our fund because I don't think I'm really good at it. And there's a lot of VCs who are. And so we have a couple of companies in that portfolio, in that part of the portfolio, but we really don't seek those deals.
So, I mean, is part of what you're saying, you've got that there's a lot of VCs who want to be in the space in general, want to have the impact, but their core competency is still essentially software, not enzymes.
Yeah, I mean, we have a fusion fund. Someone coming out of a traditional VC fund is not going to be able to compete with us head-to-head for a fusion deal. And so with our science bench and understanding and our reputation. I mean, look, my secret formula for venture capital is have all the best companies in the world find you. Or know where to find them, have the acumen to be able to pick the very best of those, only get involved in the ones where you can personally make the outcome better, where you can improve the chances of success, and then make sure you own enough of those companies that it's worthwhile for you and your investors. And so I would not agree with our team to take outside capital until I was convinced we had the very best deal flow in the world. And the only way you get the best deal flow is to earn it, and it comes from other founders. Like it's the net promoter of your founders. I mean, it's great. You could take out a fucking ad in the paper. It's not going to matter. And so when we established that was when I knew, okay, we're leading this business. So we are right now.
With that, when you talk about co-investors on deals, there's a lot of fossil fuel companies that look. Saudi Aramco today announced a $1.5 billion sustainable fund or sustainability fund, whatever the hell that means. They announced that today. What's your perspective on partnering on climate tech deals with fossil fuel companies.
Yeah, well, I'll probably get shot walking out of here, but fuck Prince Bowensaw. We're never doing business with those guys. So, but when it comes to the oil and gas companies, look, for decades, if you were an engineer and you worked in pharma, aerospace, automotive, those were the great jobs. If you wanted to like raise a family and have a steady job, like those are the great jobs. And so they're an incredible source of talent. And that's particularly the case for energy. A lot of what we're doing.
But I'm not talking about just recruiting somebody for your company. I'm saying
no, but what I'm getting
oil
to
company
is
X
that,
Ventures.
Yeah, what I'm getting to is that I can't shame the people who work in those companies. I can't shame those teams. I reserve some particular vitriol for the people who pretend that there isn't a fucking crisis and that it's not caused by humans and emission of carbon and carbon equivalents. But so fuck all those people. Fuck the GOP for continuing to propagate that bullshit. But the talent there and the people who are there to collaborate, they're incredible. I mean, our carbon removal stuff is running those same pipes in reverse. And by the way, that means the same leathernecks in the field, right? I mean, meeting with President Biden a couple years ago, he was asking about climate jobs. And he's like the Scranton, PA jobs guy, right? And I said, I want you to envision those Chevy Like a Rock ads. You know, like, you know, they would play Like a Rock, you know, those truck ads during the Super Bowl.
We have time. Do you want to do the whole song?
I got it, man. You guys cue that up for me? But like, it's the same truck, same mud, same sparks, same hard hat guy wiping his brow, trusty dog, American flag beer at the end of the day. That's what it looks like when you put up a windmill. That's what it looks like when you are actually sequestering carbon. It is the same fucking job. And there are more of those jobs in Texas right now than there are in oil and gas. And so we have actually found, you know, like Halliburton reached out recently and asked to invest in our fund. That's not going to happen. But what I said was, why don't we get our labs together, right? And they were like, great. And I was like, look, I am not going to be sanctimonious about getting our actual engineers together and working on stuff because they've got a ton of resources. And if I can, my goal is to co-opt them because it's just a better business. Like we've seen what happened in solar. The first stuff was like green premium. Yeah. Now you've got groups like D.E. Shaw, that's one of the largest solar operators in the world. Those guys just print money, and I don't think it's political, and they're not just trying to be nice about it. They just know where the money is.
So speaking of political, we were talking about this backstage. You haven't made a political donation in a couple years from now. Leaving aside the fuck the people in GOP comment from a minute ago, how do you actually? Let me ask two things. Which is first, why haven't you made a political donation in a couple of years? You were pretty prolific.
Yeah, I mean, we took on rebuilding the Democratic tech stack after 2016. It was just crazy that it didn't exist, and the party would have to rebuild it every year. And so with each campaign, it would die, and you'd have to start again. So like the Hillary campaign didn't have anything we built in the Obama campaign. It's ridiculous. So with the leadership of our partner Clay Dumas and a bunch of other folks, we collaborated to try and build that stack so it actually survives every election cycle. Build those as for-profit companies with stock options, engineers who work there full-time, and it works. I mean, I know we won Georgia, and so I can point to the votes we delivered there. That shit's exhausting, and politics is tough for a couple reasons. One is, I mean, the people you elect are always striving to almost meet your expectations. But it's always so many degrees removed from the solution, too. Like, we're trying to build stuff to convince people to maybe get off their asses, to maybe go pull the trigger, to send somebody there who's going to be locked in gridlock. And so I just don't have that patience. Like, particularly when we're thinking about a truly, the word existential is used a lot, but this.
But how do you get viewed? You know, when you're meeting, and particularly given where a lot of the companies you invest in are based in red states. You obviously have companies on the coast, but you have a lot that are in the middle and in the Southwest. I assume you sit and meet either at the local, the state, or even the federal level with Republican politicians. Yeah. How do you have those conversations, given where your politics are coming from, and they know where your politics are coming from?
Because we never talk about it. So that's number one. First of all, I'll roll up my F-350 if it helps bridge something there, and we'll spend the first 15 minutes talking about our ranches. And, you know, it's easy to dismiss cattle ranchers and farmers, but, and they may have a Trump flag flying in their yard. Most of them do. But the reality is they're stewards of the land, and often for generations. And so we look for common ground there. And if you're talking to the governor of Wyoming, I live in Wyoming, the largest coal-producing state in the nation. You're talking to the governor of Wyoming, he knows that that state is facing a real threat. Trump did everything he could to deregulate the coal economy, it doesn't work. The economics don't work. And so if you cast all that shit aside, remember that Wyoming is a state that literally kicked Liz Cheney out of the party. It's weird to pull a lever and vote for Liz Cheney. I'm still traumatized. But But when you have that conversation, just talk about the sheer economic interest for a state or for a business, the job creation, the revenues that come from that, the stability of that for a local economy. It's a totally different conversation. When you sit down with folks in West Texas, they got trophy hunted animals in the background behind them in the meeting. And we do have one elk that was in the house when we bought it, so I made sure it was in the back of the...
A full elk?
No,
or
it's
just
like
the
a
head?
bust of an elk.
Okay, just checking.
So I made sure it was in the back of the Zoom. But when you sit down and talk to those guys, you talk about daily life there. It's hotter than shit, unbearably so. Yields are down on the ranches. Cattle are struggling. The aquifer is totally fucking depleted. And they have daily seismic activity as a result of fracking. Earthquakes every day. So you talk about that shit, and then you talk about the green jobs that result from the kind of stuff we're doing, and it is a completely different conversation.
Within climate tech, give me one subsector right now that you think is overhyped.
Hydrogen.
Why?
So it was such a buzzword that a lot of money went into it, and I think valuations are out of control there. We have some bets there, and we think are better than everybody else's. Obviously, I'm a competitive person at heart, and I have no allergy to winning. But I think hydrogen gets a little bit too much press, and I also think there's too much focus on direct air capture for carbon sequester, and they kind of throw the entire sector under the bus because of DAC. You know, the first direct air capture projects, they probably used up more carbon flying to the, emitted more carbon flying to the ribbon cutting than they did, than it'll ever take out of the air. But they were really important demonstration projects. Direct air capture will be a big part of carbon removal, but a bigger part is going to be kelp, or macroalgae as it's called. A huge part is going to be basalt and limestone and mineralization, algae. Accelerating natural processes are going to be a big deal.
And this is going to be, I'm going to now display my ignorance when it comes to this stuff. You, when I say you in lower carbon, have invested in carbon capture. Where have you focused your, and help me understand the distinctions here.
Well, we launched a broad decarbonization fund. I mean, now we're on, I think we have 6 funds. And I'm not going to talk about future plans because the SEC still has these rules from 1933.
Like Chamath, he also is about to be raising money. He can't talk about it, but I'll tell you, he's going to be raising money, so I'm told.
I just blacked out for a second there. Literally, those laws date to like 33, right?
And did you know, and I can say this as a reporter doing this forever, no one's ever been penalized for violating them, ever. So you want to talk about it?
Do you guys know about SPACs, by the way? Should we? I missed that talk. I don't regret it. But we started with some broad decarbonization funds. And I can't believe I'm going to do this considering Chamath was up here earlier, but I am going to use a poker analogy. When the pot odds change, we push in more chips. And so carbon removal was part of our strategy, but we started to see that our market was really developing. Between the advanced market commitment coming from Frontier, which is $925 million committed to buy it, some countries, some trade bodies like the airlines. But what we really saw that was nuts was when Stripe and Shopify each launched a checkbox for merchants that said, do you want to dedicate 1% of your revenue to carbon removal? 8.5% of merchants said yes. Broad-based, non-billionaire philanthropist people saying, hell yeah, this matters to me. Tens of thousands of individual business people with compressed margins doing that. That was a sea change, and so we unfortunately stole the guy from Stripe who was running it and had him come over and work for us. It was a little uncomfortable calling Patrick and John. They sighed and then said, all right, how can we get involved? So they're big partners in that work. We did the same in Fusion. Fusion, people have said it's decades off for decades. Anyone who says that now hasn't been in the lab. Thanks to machine learning, experiments that used to take 1 to 2 years for one experiment now happen thousands of times per week in high fidelity in the computer, and they can try the crazy shit that never would have made it through the risk community. And so that development is straight up, and my partner is usually the one who hits the mute button on me, but I'm not going to preempt anyone's announcements. I can say Fusion is happening every single day, and now it's about net energy created, and I'm not going to spill beans.
I'm just going to follow up on that with you later, after. You raised Chamath. Let me suggest or say something he mentioned actually on his podcast last week, which I listened to. Was going to ask him about, but I'll ask you about. His perspective on IRA, among other things, was that he thinks it kills the prospect of there really being actual carbon trading. He thinks that IRA kind of. Do you agree, not agree about IRA, but do you think there is going to be actual carbon? It's been talked about forever. It hasn't come to pass.
I mean, carbon trading is supposed to have that bipartisan support, but there is no bipartisanship anymore. And so we just can't wait on that. I mean, it's funny, when the IRA was passed, people asked, did you guys write it? And I was like, I didn't even go to the ceremony celebrating it. We had nothing to do with it. However, if there is free money falling out of the sky, I will be there with a bucket to catch it.
How important, and I'll just ask this generically, how important to lower carbon and to its funds, to your returns is the IRA?
Yeah, I mean, President Biden himself called it a big fucking deal. I mean, those were his words. Like, I will double up on that. It's huge. I mean, we had a company last week that just got $50 million of grant money from that. It is massive. And it is driven not just by the climate implications, but by the business and by, we are, for better or worse, and I would call myself a globalist, but we are headed towards a much more polarized world right now. And we are absolutely dependent upon other countries for our supply chains. And so we need to rehome within the West the entire electrification and battery supply chain. It's just been neglected. And of the 9 steps you need to make a battery, 7 of them are not within the West at all. And so I have actually been wildly impressed by the folks working in the government who are directing this money towards the places that can help. But look, we just, when we met with investors recently, we were like, hey, look, it turns out we were right, but we were even righter than we thought. And I say it with humility because it's super fucked up to think that your business has been accelerated by a war in Ukraine, but it has. And we are learning that our addiction to suicide fuels is literally killing us. And it is subjecting us to the whim of these petrofascists. And so we've been sitting here doing keg stands, sucking down barrels of Brent crude and neglecting transforming the entire economy. But now I've got guys from the military, I've got guys from the other side of the aisle who just realize, I mean, I sat with the vice president of the EU a couple weeks ago, Timmermans, really smart guy, and he leads their green stuff. And he said, this winter, they've got like 85 to 90% of their energy reserves, gas coming down low, they're able to accelerate banking, some of that stuff, but next winter will be a human crisis in Europe. Fucking Europe, right? I mean, those are the stakes right now.
How important, you're obviously in the private capital space, when you watch any of these climate conferences, et cetera, when regulators, governments, et cetera, they've most recently been talking so much about how to, quote, solve this. The private capital is going to be, they kind of put the onus on private capital. Private capital sometimes in response puts some of the onus on government. IRA obviously comes through. Are the regulators right? Is private capital the key here?
It was an ignored key for a long time, and it's a big part. I mean, look, I think personally the most inspiring figure in this entire movement for me right now is Secretary Kerry. And so the climate envoy for the United States. Like, that guy could be with his feet up anywhere right now. And he is absolutely served. I mean, from the military on through Congress, that guy has served and done everything he can. But
what's he practically doing? Like,
he's practically on the road 300 days out of the year going not just nation to nation and getting them to make commitments. I mean, he just secured 4 more countries this week on methane commitments, which are huge. But he's going big company to big company. I've been in the room with him with some of the biggest polluters in the world and watched him secure commitments out of them. And by the way, some of those commitments aren't just like, hey, we promise to decarbonize. Some of the most important things he's done are these advanced market commitments. So, we work with the largest steel producers in the world, some of whom are LPs. And we just say, look, all I really want from you is just commit that if we deliver you steel of X, Y, and Z parameters, you'll buy it. And so, I don't actually need you to make a trade-off. Because here's the unfair thing about our business. Somebody asked me, I didn't even kind of process this until recently. Somebody asked me, how do you guys achieve product market fit? Because, you could work on Twitter for 2 years, very cool app. And in our old portfolio, we had 2 things we had Dub Smash and Triller, which are TikTok. They didn't work. There's no reason they didn't work, right? They just didn't become TikTok.
There were some reasons Triller didn't work.
Sure. I mean, and it was an old partner of ours who was underwhelming who did those deals. Fuck it. But you could build Twitter for a couple years and put it up in the App Store and nobody gives a shit, right? Because you're trying to create a new user behavior, trying to look in the crystal ball and predict stuff. Everything we build at lower carbon is a substitute good. Like, it's wild. I know the exact demand for everything out there. I mean, we have a partner who came from TPG and Bain, and I never would have hired somebody like that at lowercase because I don't need a model to do the Twilio C deal.
Yeah.
Right now, I know exactly what the demand curve is, and I can call the customer and be like, will you buy this shit? Hey, by the way, will you commit to buy it today? So Hart Aerospace, our company makes electric airplanes out of Sweden. By the way, again, a beneficiary of machine learning, they built the plane in the computer before they assembled it in the hangar. And so they took a 11-year, multi-billion-dollar process, and on single-digit millions of dollars, they built it in 2 years. Along the way, they figured out they could make it 30 seats instead of 19 seats. So they've got billions of dollars of orders from the majors, not because they're trying to be warm and fuzzy, but because those planes make their unprofitable routes profitable. And the result is it's just good fucking greed-driven business.
Final question for you, very quickly. You started this by saying that you were on Shark Tank when you kind of decided to do this. Mark Cuban comes up after the break. What's one question Hope should ask him?
So here was my big mistake on Shark Tank, is that I fucked with Cuban a lot, because that's the nature of our friendship. But he's a religious figure in the United States. I realized, like, Mark Cuban could be president if his family decided they were on board for that. There's no doubt. That guy, I have walked through the parking lot of an SEC football game and just watched the seas part, and I would get stepped on. Nobody even noticed I was there. In fact, I literally changed out of my Shark Tank clothes into clothes for the game while standing next to the Bo Jackson statue, the meeting spot. I literally stripped down to my skivvies. Nobody fucking noticed because Mark Cuban was standing next to me. So I have learned not to fuck with that guy ever again. So I actually deeply respect him. I love to tease him and challenge each other's thinking, but honestly, I think he's one of the most authentic people. And by the way, I owe him no money or anything like that. So I'll just say straight up, I think he's a reader. I think he learns. I think he's humble. And, you know, a guy, unlike some other people who showed up today, rolls in with no security, and it's just who he is. And so I wish I could bust his balls right now, but I'm really grateful for what he's doing on the drug stuff. I think it's really important. So
we'll do that after break. Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks.